Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us here on INC Live for another fighter interview. My name is Karl Bainbridge and I am joined by the lady on the right-hand side of my screen, former professional interviewer, podcast host, firefighter, you name it, she's pretty much had a go at it and perfected it. It's Taylor Wilde. Taylor, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, and obviously you're a little bit of a trailblazer in this case as well. Normally we focus on mixed martial arts here on this channel, but you are a professional wrestler. You're the first guest that we've had from this field. But looking through some of your track record, though, there's a little bit of an MMA fan in there as well.
Well, did you say MMA fan?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah. I'm a fan of fighters across the board. At the end of the day, whether you're a pro wrestler, MMA, we're all cut from the same cloth. We've all have these kind of similar upbringings where, maybe things weren't exactly the easiest, or we had these needing to overachieve in a certain field. And, we're all a little bit kind of kooky because, you can't be completely right of mind if you want to fight professionally. So yeah, I'm a fan of fighters. I'm a fan of people, but I would say that I'm a misfit, and in the world of fighting, male, female, anything in between, there's that kindred misfit spirit.
And I have to say as well, there's actually a lot of reasons why I wanted to have you as a guest, because I've followed your work on your podcast. I think you're a fantastic interviewer. So it might be a little bit strange for you to be the interviewee
I
rather
love it. I
than.
feel like I could just relax.
Yeah. And of course, from my own personal perspective, I remember watching TNA back around 2008, 2009 when you were one of the big stars there. And of course, when it comes to your podcast, one of your guests you had recently was Raquel Pennington, UFC bantamweight. And I thought all of these things put together made you someone I'm really fascinated to speak to. So thank you very much for joining us.
Awesome. Cool. No, I'm excited. Thank you for having me. And I had no idea I was the first professional wrestler on the show. So hopefully I do a good job representing the clan.
Yep. I've always said that pro wrestling and mixed martial arts are almost sort of like cousins. Obviously, you had the stuff in Pancrase back in the 90s where you had a lot of ex-pro wrestlers, people like Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, who ended up doing like legit fighting and obviously became big stars in the UFC. So there's always been a bit of a connection between the two and it still continues today.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think it's best to go back to the very start. What was it that made you want to pursue a career in pro wrestling?
Well, it was one of those things where all the stars had aligned. Growing up as a Canadian, I played hockey, and in the summers, I played baseball. I was always really athletically inclined and a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, even from a young age, full of energy. My poor parents, they put me in every sport possible. And I knew kind of midway through high school that I wanted to get into a field that was physical, but, kind of catered to that adrenaline side of me. And I was working at a Parks and Rec gym just in the city of Toronto, hoping to take kinesiology in university, become a personal trainer when that big personal training boom was happening in the early 2000s. And one of the fitness equipment techs, he was actually just a local indie wrestler. And he came up to me and he said, "Well, obviously, you're very fit. You like sports. My professional wrestling school is always looking for women. Would this be something that interested you?" And I thought, yeah, it sounds amazing. It's like this underground dark world. You have to know somebody to know somebody. It's like Fight Club. You can't just show up at a professional wrestling school. And my uncle was a really big fan. He got all the WrestleManias and the pay-per-views. And I had friends that were really into wrestling, but I probably didn't really get the itch until Trish Stratus made her mark because, hometown girl, she's from Toronto. She's beautiful and she's really fit and she's blonde and smart and badass. And I think she was that first kind of change in female professional wrestlers where this was an athlete. This was like a female superhero. So when I had the invite and I was kind of into, that Divas era, Jeff Hardy, Edge and Christian, Trish Stratus. And I thought, sure, yeah, like I really want to try this. And I fell in love. It only took one class and I was hooked.
And obviously, when it comes to Canadians and pro wrestling as well, there's plenty that you can come to. You look at people like the Hart family, Chris Jericho, Trish, as you mentioned before. What do you think it is that attracts people from your country towards pro wrestling? Maybe more than it does, say, elsewhere.
It's cold here. You have to be so hard. um, yeah, you know what? I don't know. I think there has to be something to be said about the cold weather. Um, your pain threshold is probably a little bit higher. You get squirrely. You want to do things that are indoors, and you can't spend your days outside like in California every day. You're locked inside kind of 6 to 8 months out of the year. And yeah, I don't know. We do very well in hockey and we do well in professional wrestling. So, and it can't be anything to do with our mentality because we're overly polite and apologetic. So it's not that. But I can only attribute it to the cold.
So you started your work on the indie circuit for a few years, including around sort of 2005. You spent the summer working in Mexico. What was it like working down there? Because it's a very different style of wrestling down south.
Yeah. I think going down to Mexico as a young woman, I don't even think I was 19 yet. That was the first time that I had really left Toronto in a way that wasn't, a vacation with my family. And it was a culture shock. The wrestling, like you said, is very different. There is a language barrier. You're on these lucha, um, these professional wrestlers, their ground. So you have to learn how to work with them. They don't speak English. You don't speak Spanish. So you're learning how to do a sport just by body language. And it pretty much, I think, changed the trajectory of my career because I was very much trained in lucha. So that was my bread and butter. But again, like all those things, being away from home, being a very small fish in a big sea of female lucha libre or luchadoras, and learning how to work in that field, and then coming out of that a much more mentally strong, physically strong professional wrestler. I was like, okay, I am ready to conquer North America because if I can hang in Mexico, and those women, they made you earn it. You know what I mean? Like they weren't like, "Yay, welcome to my country. You're going to, make money that someone local could be making." They beat the crap out of me. So I loved the experience and I love Mexico. I am really toying with the idea of moving there in the next 10 to 15 years if I possibly can.
Any fun stories working on the indies?
Oh God. Fun stories or creepy stories, or which one do you want?
Well, we'll keep it fun for now.
Fun story. It's been a long time since I was on the indies. But I loved working on the indies. I don't have one particular story that comes to mind, but I will say that getting in those miles, traveling with other indie wrestlers, just trying to make it, all squishing into a four-door sedan like a pack of sardines, and making little money, and just the stories that you accumulate when you're on the road and making no money, and performing for like five people. It completely changes you as a person. And for me, when you come from the indies and then you make it, you're so much more thankful for everything you have when you then get a major contract, because you know what it's like to wrestle for five people for $25, and you had to drive 4 hours to get there and 4 hours home. So it's I love my history and my time on the indies.
And that major contract comes in May 2006. You get the call from the WWE developmental contract. Tell us about how all that came about.
I had a tryout like 6 months before that in Buffalo, and it didn't go anywhere. And then I was invited to Deep South Wrestling in McDonough, Georgia, and I had a week-long tryout. So it was a big deal. They flew me down, put me in a hotel. I had already had friends that had been signed at that time, Angelina Love, Chrissy Vane, who I kind of knew but didn't know, knew through the indies. And Bill DeMont was the trainer. And Training is where I really shined at that time in my career. I loved training. I trained 4 days a week on top of working the indies for the first 2 years of my career. And, you can really judge somebody on how they perform in a training session over the course of a week versus watching them have just one single 10 to 12 minute match. So, they got to see me do my thing, and I felt really good and confident. And lo and behold, at the end of the week, I was offered my WWE contract.
It must have been fascinating working on the developmental scene, because I was just reading up on some of the stories around that sort of time. There were some days you were performing as yourself, some days they would have you under a mask. I've always been fascinated when it comes to kayfabe, especially when you're playing like an extreme character. Like, how do you deal with it? Like, at one point, does Chantel end and Taylor Wilde begin?
Yeah, sure. I think the thing about professional wrestling, it depends on your character. Like when they had me wrestling as a Japanese boy, that was like kayfabe to the max, right? I couldn't train with anybody in that gimmick. I had to do it by myself. I couldn't tell anybody about it. It's really hard. It's really hard. It's lonely, for lack of a better term. But Taylor Wilde, the character, is kind of just an extension, overinflated version of myself. And that comes out when the red light goes on the camera and Chantel Malosky comes back as soon as that camera light goes off. I feel really blessed and fortunate that I've had a long career, but I've always stayed really grounded. I've basically stayed in Toronto. I have a full-time job as a firefighter. I am a mom, a single mom. And I love playing this character because I'm actually really camera shy and I get to be this person through this character of Taylor Wilde and have fun in front of the camera. But if I had to do it as myself, Chantel Malosky, it would be like very much more subdued.
You mentioned before you played a Japanese boy as part of one of your characters. Was there any truth to the story that you were originally supposed to win the Cruiserweight title as this character?
That is what I was told. Like, here's the thing with politics and any high level sport, be it WWE or anything in the NHL or, whatever. What can be one moment can change, 2 minutes later. So I had a sit down meeting with Vince McMahon. This was his idea. This was his baby. It was what was supposed to happen. Whether I was going to win the Cruiserweight title or not as part of that storyline, I was definitely supposed to debut as Sendai, Japanese boy, who then is revealed as a female, whatever storyline they take. But there is absolute truth that that was the character in the storyline. As far as like winning the title or not, I don't know.
Unfortunately, things don't work out for the Federation, and you begin looking for a career outside of wrestling, potentially going back to school. So how do we go from that to getting the call from TNA, and not only signing with TNA, going on to win their title?
Yeah, so I had my run with WWE, and kind of the age old thing happens. They wanted to do this thing with me, the Japanese boy. It didn't work out. So then they had nothing else for me, and that was it. So I thought, okay, whatever. Like that was the goal. I wanted to work for WWE. I achieved that goal. I didn't go as far as maybe I had hoped, but I thought, okay, well, I'm young. I'm gonna go back home, finish my degree, got all registered, signed up for my classes, bought my books, and then, 4 months, I think, back into being a normal everyday student, I get the call from TNA to have a tryout. Same thing, they flew me down, put me up in a hotel. I had a tryout match, and I had a contract that night. So, see you later, York University. I'm going back on the road.
I've always wanted to know this as an industry outsider, but how far in advance are storylines booked in pro wrestling? Like, when did you know that you were going to beat Awesome Kong to win the title?
Oh, day of. Day of.
And you look at women's wrestling in 2022 as well. It's held in very high regard. You look at the work that people like Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair have been doing. But around the time that you were around, it was almost sort of seen as a bit of an attraction. Yet the
Sure.
Knockouts division comes along, becomes one of the highest rated parts of TNA, and it starts to have a wider impact on the business. The WWE start taking their women's division a lot more seriously. Do you feel that the Knockouts sort of had that sort of long-standing impact? Did you feel that things were changing when you were there?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt, because the difference between what TNA did with the knockouts is they hired all female workers, all female professional wrestlers who had slugged it out on the indies. We all already knew each other. We had worked on the indies anywhere from 5 or 10 years prior to TNA. And also, the difference was TNA was giving us the platform to display what we could do as female athletes. They were giving us more than one match a show. They were giving us multiple pre-tapes. We had all these segments. We had continuity and storylines. And what WWE did would just throw together a females match here, there, a bra and panties match there, or a number one contenders match here. But nothing was ever taken seriously. And it didn't mean that the talent wasn't there. You could have the most talented female professional wrestlers, but if you don't have a team that is giving them a platform to display what they can do and write them a storyline that people are going to care about, then nothing changes. But without a doubt, what the knockouts did in that era absolutely raised the bar. And by raising the bar, WWE, which is always the contender, has to raise the bar in what they're doing. So ultimately, the knockouts changed the trajectory of female professional wrestling to where it is today. And where it is today is so exciting. It really is amazing. The growth in the past 10 to 15 years has been phenomenal. The talent pool is so diverse.
I mean, the fact that the women headlined WrestleMania a few years ago, it shows how far it's come.
It's amazing. 10 years ago, that idea would have been laughed out of a creative meeting. Absolutely. So it's showing the girls can hang with the boys just as hard.
We are an MMA show, so we have to ask you about that. Over the past few years, one of the things we've seen is a lot of people from mixed martial arts go into pro wrestling. We'll talk about one in particular a little bit later on, but outside of that, you've had people like Shayna Baszler, Matt Riddle, Paige Van Zant's just signed with AEW. As somebody who's been in the pro wrestling industry, are you welcoming of like MMA fighters entering your business? Are you a little bit, you haven't worked as hard for this, why do you get to jump the queue?
Oh my gosh, not at all. At the end of the day, this is a business and this is an industry, and it's entertainment. It is sports entertainment. I think that cross branding is genius. I would love the opportunity, maybe one day, to be able to jump from Impact to AEW or, whatever, because competition is good for business. It's good for growth. And I think someone like Ronda Rousey, who was arguably at the top of her field at one point, her coming into WWE and, making her mark at WrestleMania is good for female fighters, and it's good for exposure, and it grows. It grows what we've already, started to set the foundation for. I don't think it's about jumping the queue, because it's not like they're ever bringing an undercard person into another field. They're bringing someone that has fought blood, sweat, and tears for the role they have, and like I said, I am all for cross contamination. Bring it on.
And what's your opinion been of Ronda in the WWE? Because I read a lot of Twitter, social media, that sort of thing, and it's very divisive. I know some people who absolutely love her work, some people that don't really have the time for her. Where do you personally stand?
Okay, so I'm of two minds. So as a professional wrestler, she's not a professional wrestler. She is a professional fighter. So her level of work is not gonna be as high as someone like Natty Neidhart, who has been a veteran in the sport for almost 20 years. It's simply not going to compare. Is she strong? Is she incredible in her field? Absolutely. And is she entertaining in the world of professional wrestling? Absolutely. But then someone like Natty, who is a good friend of mine, I've known her pretty much since the beginning of my career. She has nothing but glowing things to say about Ronda. So if she's a good person, if she works hard, if she's helping grow our industry, I support it.
I have to say I did watch the match she had with Charlotte back at Backlash. Very good matchup.
There you go. See, as long as it's entertaining, um, and she's respectful of what we do, then I only have support and love for other female fighters.
Back to yourself though. Your contract with TNA ended in 2010. 25 years old, you decide, that's it, I'm ready to move on.
Yep. Well, I know it was okay. I don't do anything conventionally. It's not in my nature. Uh, but I did everything that I thought I could accomplish at that point. I really did. I had a really good run for like 5 solid years on TNA. I had storylines with all the major heels, and the company was changing at that time. Hogan had come in. They were really changing the nature of the stories and the way they were focusing on the knockouts. And I'd been going at this hard since I was 18 years old. And being on the road for that time in your formative adult years is exhausting. So I got out before I burnt out, and I didn't want to be that female in the locker room that was in a veteran position, that wasn't still young and hungry and wanting to make the product better. I was done. So I kind of left with my shoulders back and chin held high. And I didn't get a lot of support for it. People are like, "Why are you leaving in your prime?" But I didn't feel that way. I felt I was done and I needed to walk away gracefully.
And since then, you've been a master of all trades. You went back to school, you got a degree in psychology. As you mentioned before, you became a mother a few years ago. And also, you started work as a firefighter.
Mhm. Yep.
Still, that must just be you needing that adrenaline rush.
Yeah, absolutely. So before professional wrestling, before high school, I actually thought I was going to join the military. I always thought I was going to be in some sort of like paramilitary world. I don't know why, it spoke to me. So when I left wrestling, I thought I'm either going to be a police officer or I'm going to be a firefighter. And I realized I don't love rules. I don't love the law. It's not that I don't abide by it, but it attracts a very specific type of personality that I'm just not. I wanted to be one of the good guys, the good girls, and while everyone's running out of a burning building, I want to be the one running in. So it just all made sense to me.
And of course, the thing that drew my attention to yourself, you have the podcast. Would you like to tell our audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Wild On is a podcast about the intimate side of fighters. It started as just my sisters, my professional wrestling girlfriends, um, but now it has been expanded to MMA fighters. And what I talk about is the intimate side of them as humans, not just as fighters. They're mothers, they're artists, they're musicians, they're entrepreneurs, they're all around badasses. And I also like to focus on their connection to spirituality because what I find with all fighters across the board is at some point we became fighters because we probably experienced some sort of trauma in our lives. And the higher you are on the totem pole, or the more professional or well respected you are as a fighter, the more technical your fighting becomes and the greater connection you have to mental calmness and spirituality. So, someone who I just interviewed, Raquel Pennington, who is at the top of her field and a very aggressive fighter. Is actually very, very spiritually inclined. She's been doing these things like sweat tents and she journals every day. And I just really like to bring out this side of these fighters that you might not be able to Google. And I feel like I'm able to do that because I'm not just someone who's interested in what they do. I live their life. I am a fighter and I have experienced the same pains, the same traumas that they have. And I've been on my own spiritual journey. So it's a really relaxed conversational type podcast, but you're going to get something out of these women that you won't normally be able to just Google. So if you have these morbid curiosities about these women outside of who they are as fighters, my podcast is for you. And it's available on every major podcast platform and YouTube. You can watch all the interviews back.
You just recently wrapped up on season 2, but you promise you'll be back for a 3rd season. Are there any guests that we can expect?
Sure.
So 4 seasons, I should say.
Sure.
Any guests that we can expect for the next season?
It is, who do I kick it off with? I kick it off with Crystal Pittman, who is bare knuckle fighter. And, that's my lawyer calling. So I can either call you right back or we can wrap it up here.
I think that's a good place for us to wrap it up then, Taylor. Thank you very much for joining us. You've been a fantastic guest. And thank you very much as well, everybody who has been tuning in at home. This has been the INC. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you. Bye.